Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to all of you. Greeting all of you in South Africa, greeting all of you on the African continent, greeting all of you joining us from across the globe. I am so happy to have you all here on tonight's panel discussion, where we are going to be hearing from the new voices of hope, of courage, and of resilience. My name is Lesego Ramatlare, and I am so honored to be doing this tonight, to be hosting the final panel of the Artfluence Festival. And tonight is super exciting for me because we're going to be talking and hearing from young people from around the globe and how the arts are inspiring them in their work as political and social activists. So before we go too far, I really just want to give a shout out to our partners for making this possible tonight. A shout out to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, to the Center for Creative Arts, to the Embassy of the Netherlands, to the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences. But tonight is made even sweeter and even more special by the partnership with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And of course, Ahmed Kathrada was a human rights activist himself. He was a prisoner on Robben Island, and he worked hand in hand with Nelson Mandela and the other political leaders in the fight for South Africa's democratic freedom. So it really is truly a special night tonight. Now, activism through arts that is highlighting hope and highlighting courage and highlighting resilience really reminds me of the historical moment that we've all recently witnessed in Sibongile Mngoma and Abahlali Base NAC. This is a group of artists who took themselves to the front lines of battle, the battle for human rights, particularly in the arts and culture sector. And they really instilled hope in a sector that was slowly losing their hope and whose light was slowly diminishing. They stood resilient in their fight. You know, they were separated from family, separated from friends, sleeping on the floor for 60 days. And finally, they displayed courage when they were faced with potential danger on a daily basis. Good news is that Sibongile Mngoma, on behalf of Abahlali Base NAC, recently received the inaugural Human Rights Award from the Artfluence Festival, which was a sweet moment for all of us. And it makes it even more fitting that tonight we're talking to young leaders who are exhibiting such hope, such courage, and such resilience. So again, a huge welcome to all of you. And I'm so excited for you to all meet these incredible young leaders. I remember how I felt when I got all of their bios. I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done with the last 31 years of my life when I'm talking to 16, 17, 19-year-olds that have done such incredible things with their lives. So without any further ado, I'm going to do a quick introduction of each panelist. We've got 10 people, so I'm going to just wish through their names, which part of the globe they're in, and a little bit about what they do. So I'm going to start with our South Africans. We've got activist and poet Sinalo Yekani. We've then got Nasirah Kathrada, who is an author that is passionate about social justice and human rights. We've got Raeesah Noor-Mahomed, a climate and intersectional activist, artist, and revolutionary. Then we move on further into the African continent. We've got Jacques Bona, who is from Burundi, but currently residing in Johannesburg. Jacques works for the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. We then have from Nigeria, writer, I'm going to take this slow, Ihezue Somto Onyedikachi. Ha ha ha. And an interesting fact about Somto is that he has a dog named River and a cat named Salem. So that's pretty fun. We've got Sheila Nell Kiggundu, a final year student at the Makerere University, who is pursuing a degree in civil engineering. Sheila is from Kampala, Uganda. We then move on globally. We've got Jana Jihad, who is from Palestine. She is, I believe, our youngest panelist, who serves as the ambassador of Shamsan, which is a South African initiative that promotes arts and culture as a dialogue for positive social change. We then have from Lebanon, the creator and host of the Let's Talk Peace podcast, Amanda Haydar. We then have from the USA, Joyia Phillips, a youth ambassador for an education program called the Evolvolution Initiative. And finally, we have Migrant Protection Consultant and a master's graduate, Jade van Huisseling, who is joining us from the Netherlands. So to my colleagues on this panel, everybody's going to meet you all just now, but it is such a pleasure to see you all. It is such a pleasure to meet you all. And for those of you who are joining us from home, if you want to know more about our panelists, their biographies are up on the Artfluence website and on the Artfluence Facebook page. So I think we can get into this discussion. That took me a whopping 5 minutes, which is great. And I'm gonna stick in the African continent for now. I'm gonna talk to Jacques. Now, Jacques, we're all connecting from different parts of the globe, and you yourself are from Burundi, but you are currently residing in Johannesburg, South Africa. And, you know, we've witnessed a lot of xenophobic attacks, particularly within the borders of South Africa. You know, you as an African who has now relocated living in Johannesburg, do you think that we will ever get to a state of peace as brothers and sisters of the soil? And just generally, what is your take on the subject of xenophobia, particularly in the geographical setting that we are in? Jacques, over to you. So it seems that Jacques might not be here. It might be a network problem, but, you know, still sticking to the issues of xenophobia or, you know, inter-country mixing and all of that. I'm going to talk to Jade, you know, on the subject of xenophobia and moving into something closer, which is migrant workers. That is people who move from the place that they originate from and move to a different place, possibly to look for work or just to look for a better life. You know, tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing, Jade, as an advocate for the rights of migrant workers, and also how are you using your creative skills to do your work?
So good evening, everyone. Well, I'm Jade. I'm here with Amin, colleague, friend. We are based in Lebanon, and yeah, so basically we are both advocating for the rights and protection of migrants, coming from Africa, but also from Asia mostly, and who are indeed looking for a better life, but then end up in a system that is called the kafala system, where a lot of like the rights are taken from the migrants and their employment becomes entitled to the employer, their employment and their rights. And if you will elaborate about the life of the migrants in Lebanon.
Hi all, my name is Amin. I'm active. So there is this kafala system here in Lebanon. It's just based on the employer who can have like a full control on Africans or on Asians here in Lebanon, whatever they want to do. So we are just trying now our best to change the system so we can give like the simplest freedom for the migrants and the Asians, and hopefully we can do our best.
Great. And just Jade, to just chat a little bit further about the subject of migrant workers, what is the severity of the infringement of human rights on migrant workers where you are located?
Yeah, so basically, again, like, so the migrants basically come here based on a contract. That's often, sometimes it's lied about like where they're going to. So for example, they come here thinking that they would start a position, come here and they don't really know what their rights are. They work for what they call here like a kafil. So it's an employer and basically a lot of protection rights, like they don't really know what their rights are. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to speak like for migrants. So again, I think it's better to ask Amin.
So yes, so you have here in Lebanon sponsorship, and so you go to an office and you ask for a mate. So when you ask for the mate, so they send you back home, like let's say in Ethiopia or other country in Africa, and then they send them here. So they made them sign papers like saying, I'm willing to go to Lebanon, to work in Lebanon, and to have this decent salary. But then it's not all true, because when they came here, it's a different thing, you know? So it's a different reality. And then they arrive here because we are not in the labor law. So it means we don't have protection as migrants in Lebanon. So this gives a full control of full, like you can control everything that you do here in Lebanon. So basically the migrants here in Lebanon, they don't have no rights, like zero rights. Like it's the same what happens before in the 60s and 70s in South Carolina, America. And so it's the same, but it's just modern. And you are not allowed to do anything, even if you want to go back to your country just to visit your family, your mom, your brother. You cannot do it unless he signed a paper that, it's like
employer, so it may basically like the migrant himself or herself that becomes entitled to this employer. So he has like the decisions to, for example, a lot of times like the migrant wants to leave the house, but then, for example, the passport is taken by the employer, and the passport she wants it. She like goes out of the house, and then once her passport, she's accused of stealing. Like those kind of things, it's really shocking. And we try to set up, like, for example, a lot of migrants want to leave to the country, but it's really hard because they don't have legal papers. Some of them are irregular. So like they have like no status because it's entitled to the employer. So we try to see how we can find a way with legal assistance, like to like partners that do legal assistance and to get them back to the country, which is all it's a difficult system, so to say.
Thank you, guys. And I could be very wrong, but on the 4th of September 2020, as severe as this battle for human rights for migrants is, am I correct in saying that there was a law that was passed that gave migrants some kind of independence against their employers in terms of terminating contracts or whatnot? And if it is true, how effective is it?
It's true, but at the same time, here in Lebanon, they go with it. So it's what happened is when the government publish something, they don't.
It's hard to follow up.
Yeah, it's hard to follow up.
Yeah, trust me, I can relate to that. Sometimes when such things are passed does not necessarily mean that they will be implemented. So thank you so much, guys. I don't think we have Jacques yet, but I'm going to move on. Sinalo, my South African sister, one of the things that I find most fascinating at the moment for me personally is what the views and the opinions of our generation, particularly the South African generation. You are on the cusp of young adulthood. You're 19 years old. And you started writing poetry at the age of 17. So you've been a poet for the last 2 years. You're inspired by seeing change in your community. From what I understand, that is what drives you, seeing the change that needs to happen in your community. What subjects are you confronting in your poetry? Are they related to the change that you want to see in your community?
So far, yes. I write the most about social issues, things that we face as the youth, or things that I see that are happening around me. So I write about your Youth Day, African Day, all about those things. So I'm raising awareness out there that there's a lot that is still happening in our communities, in our country, and also in our continent.
Sinalo, you mentioned Youth Day. Talk to me a little bit about, you're 19 years old. You were barely even thought of when Youth Day happened in 1976. For those of you who don't know what Youth Day is in South Africa, on the 16th of June in 1976, high school students in Soweto, they underground organized a march where they were basically marching against being taught in Afrikaans, which is a colonial language in essence. And they marched, and while it was a huge monumental moment in our history, a lot of blood was shed, and it has subsequently become known as Youth Day. So Sinalo, you as still being part of the youth, in a day like today, when really things like marching for not learning in Afrikaans seem like such old concepts, but what does Youth Day mean for you?
For me, Youth Day means a lot because it's a reminder of what was happening in the past, that the struggle still continues, because I believe that we are not free yet. There are a lot of things that are happening, that were happening in the past, you see. So I believe that Youth Day is a day that should be celebrated and should remind us as the youth that we should be the ones who continue with this struggle. We should be the ones who continue where our parents or, you know, our past leaders have left. That's the drive that I get, which we should also continue the struggle, because I believe the struggle continues.
And Sinalo, how do you think we can continue the struggle? How do you think we can do it? Because we're living in a different age of social media. You know, people are more comfortable to be behind their social media and like and post than they are to be as physically and directly active as those kids were in 1976. So to your, you know, to your peers, what kind of activism could they take up?
For me, we could use art, because I believe that in the modern days, a lot of people are using your technology that are like using social media. So when you draw, using your drawing, using your songs, you know, poetry, you can like reach out to many people, as many as like you can reach to many people out there. So art is the way of like connecting to the outer world. So I believe that if we use art, or we engage ourselves more in art, we can like reach out to people.
I really couldn't agree with you more, because if you look at people like Mamu Miriam Makeba, people like Hugh Masekela, they were our export products during our struggle. And they, while they were in exile, they used their platform to spread our message globally. If you think about the famous poster of Nelson Mandela, the Free Mandela poster, photographs of Nelson Mandela were banned at some point. It was illegal to even utter his name, to have a poster, a picture of him. And a brave artist decided that, you know what, I'm going to break the law and I'm going to put his picture on a piece of paper. And that picture became a global image of South Africans' struggle. So I agree with you. Art is very important in activism for human rights. Jana, you know, like Sinalo, you've been passionate about seeing change in your community and in your country. You were known as the youngest journalist in the world at the age of 12. This woman at the age, this girl really, you know, at the age of 12, you were known as the youngest journalist in the world. Why was it important for you to start documenting the realities of your life and the lives of other children in Palestine?
Right. So as you said, I actually started my journalism at the age of 7 years old. I started it when I realized that a lot of things were happening to us as Palestinian children living under the occupation. I've witnessed so many things happen to my family, from losing people that I love to either being murdered by the Israeli occupation, or seeing my friends getting arrested or injured. So I was actually trying to find a way to show the world what is happening to us as Palestinian children in our daily lives. And how we're living and how the occupation affects our lives. So I started reporting by using my mother's phone to actually film our weekly demonstrations. And whenever something happens, like for example, when the Israeli soldiers would raid our houses in the middle of the night, or when I was going to my school and there would be a checkpoint. So I started using journalism as a way to send my message and the message of Palestinian children to the world. And I really found it extremely effective, to be honest.
You know, Jana, you have to forgive me for my ignorance, but I don't know, was this a dangerous situation for you to put yourself in the position of really exposing the realities of what life was really like for children and people in Palestine?
I mean, extremely. Just being a Palestinian child living under occupation by itself is extremely dangerous. Our existence in Palestine, we are never safe. There could, like, an Israeli soldier could just come raid my house, arrest me just because of my identity, just because of me trying to defend my house. So either ways, if I didn't resist, or if I did resist, in other words, I would not be safe because of my life under the Israeli occupation. But of course, it puts me in a higher risk because the Israeli occupation actually targets whoever would try to expose their actions, and whoever would try to send what is going on, truly what is going on from in Palestine to the world. So yes, I was actually targeted so many times during demonstrations, or during times where the Israeli occupation would come. They would be like, oh yes, this is Janna. They would start coming in front of the camera, try to hit me, break my camera, prevent me from filming and documenting. So yes, this is extremely dangerous, but staying silent is even more dangerous, and would lead us to even, to be in a very much more difficult situation, I believe.
You're such a brave young lady. As I mentioned early on, we just saw a historical movement where for 60 days artists staged a sit-in at a government office, the National Arts Council, because of corruption, greed, manipulation, you name it, it is what it is. And there've been a lot of activism around the whole thing, protest action, arts protest. And I remember sometimes, I would call up a few people and say, hey guys, let's go visit the Abahlali at NAC. Let's just go see what's happening. And, not to be judgmental or anything, but a lot of people would say to me, oh my gosh, but it's so dangerous. Oh my gosh, but what if the police come? Oh my gosh, what would? And, listening to what you're saying, I realized that you don't have the privilege to say, what if? It is what it is. You're either in or you're out. And I realized that myself and my colleagues over here that were having those kind of conversations, perhaps we're existing in some sort of privilege to say, we can decide if we want to fight the system or not. So I really take my hat off to you for your bravery. And I'm looking at the time, but I would just 30 seconds, Janna. What is the occupation for those who don't know? Very quickly.
Of course. So, personally, we are living in Palestine. Palestine was occupied in 1948. So we've been living under occupation for over 7 decades. And occupation is literally occupying everything and violating most of, if not all, our human rights as people living in an occupied area. Even our right to live, like we don't get to live, we don't get to go to school like other people, we don't get to live our childhood as other children around the world. So occupation is an occupation of our land, is an occupation of our mind, of our success, putting limitations and boundaries to our dreams, putting limitations and boundaries to every single right, fundamental right for our existence as humans. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Janna. And just looking at our chat, we've got Afzal Noor-Mahomed, who is saying, one Palestine, one nation. Social justice will only be attained in occupied Palestine when every inch of the land is liberated from Zionist occupation and colonialization. It is easier for me to get to Jerusalem from South Africa than from Palestinians living in Gaza and the West Bank. Thank you so much for that, Afzal. So we've got Jacques back. And Jacques, earlier on, we were talking to Jade about her work in defending the human rights of migrant workers. And, you, as I was saying, you are from Burundi, but you are living in Johannesburg. And we've seen a lot of xenophobic attacks within the South African borders. So, how do you think we'll ever see a day when we can just find peace as brothers and sisters of the soil? And generally, what is your take on the subject of xenophobia? And just to my colleagues on the panel, if we can keep our answers as, straight to the point as possible, but obviously feeding us with as much information as you can. Thank you, Jacques.
Thank you for having me. I like the subject xenophobia because living in South Africa, xenophobia has been a norm because we're living in a country whereby, you know, people they don't want to look at the bigger picture of what's important and what's not to focus on. So with me, my take on xenophobia, it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge, you know, seeing how people killing one another, especially people of the same race killing, you know, one another, despite of them being from, you know, different countries. So that, to me personally, it's been a challenge, you know. It's been something that has been hard for me to cope, you know. And, you know, whenever I think of this xenophobic attack, you know, it also kind of like contribute on my art. It kind of like hold me back at some point, you know. Sometimes, you know, when I sit down and trying to write a song and trying to work on a beat, so I'd be like asking myself, who am I singing for? Who am I rapping for? You know, I'd be having all these thoughts. If people can come together, you know, and trying to make a change despite of their race, to me, that can be something big to focus on. But my take on the xenophobia is that I believe one day there'll be peace in South Africa. I believe, you know, people they believe too much, and then they think little, you know. And, you know, people they have this mentality of saying, you know, our foreigners they come to South Africa to steal our work, to take our women and all these things, you know. People they just have, you know, small mentalities, you know. They don't want to look at the bigger picture, you know, to think big and say we can't do much, we can't do it different. But with me as a young artist and also a young black, you know, Burundian, South African, is that I'm just gonna do by any means, you know, to send a word of message, you know, to tell people that this is the time now to make a change. This is the time we as a people, despite of your color or race or your ethnic, you know, to stand together as one and say, okay, this is the time we're gonna make change, and everything that we do it because we wanna reach a common goal. We wanna reach a particular goal because we are the future, and also I believe the future of the youth depend on today's youth. Yes, we the youth are the future of this country, and we are the future of the universe itself. And we should also not also look at xenophobia, we should also look at climate justice, you know, and how we can you know, protect the universe. So we can only look at xenophobia. To me, I can say it's governmental. You know, the government is there, they see what's happening, they don't want to talk about it, you see. So there's other things that we can also look at. With xenophobia is that people they need to learn on their history, you know, Africa in general, African history, you know, understand where they're from, because I believe there's links in everywhere in the world. So I can't sit here today and say I'm South African American. Whenever I'm outside there, there's a lot of Ethiopians, they like to claim me because of my hair, saying, no, you are one of us. There's no way can be a black person with, you know, with curly hair or whatever. So I had to explain myself, no, I'm a black African, as you see me right now, a Burundian from, you know, East Africa. So they don't believe all that. So people, they need to be taught, and they need to stop believing anything they hear. And they should also try, you know, and take a stand against climate justice. And also other thing, I'll try by any means to use my, you know, my artistic nature, you know, to send a message out there and try to reach out to as many youth as we can as possible. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacques. You know, I think when I think about South Africa's history, when I think about the fact that in our most needy, our moment of need, it was our African brothers and sisters that came to our rescue. When Nelson Mandela went out with Somto Ihezue, it was them who accepted us, it was them who funded us, it was them who really helped us. So when xenophobic attacks happen, it's very embarrassing for me. As a South African, I want to hide somewhere. But Jacques, if we have time at the end, you know, I know that you also do music. I know you're a music maker, you're a producer. If we have time, maybe you could just play us out with a verse, maybe a rap verse about xenophobia and how you are fusing your message with your art. So I'm gonna leave you alone, and then hopefully you can get yourself ready for that one. So I'm going to move on to Sheila, who is in South Africa. Is Sheila in South Africa? No, Sheila's not in South Africa. But what I meant to say is that currently in South Africa, Sheila, you see the danger of having notes sometimes, you confuse yourself. But currently in South Africa, Sheila, femicide is a leading pandemic. To be quite honest, I think it is vying for the first place position with COVID-19 as to what is the bigger danger, COVID-19 or women getting killed on a daily basis in South Africa. And, you know, you as an African woman, you're also an academic, you know, and you have huge plans for your academic career. You're currently doing your postgrad or perhaps pre-grad, but you've got plans to continue with masters and all of that. So I know that you've got big plans for your career as an academic. What are your views on education and using it to liberate African women?
I think education would be the first tool in teaching people their rights. Most girls and women do not know, like, they're subjected to some of this assault, to some of this gender-based violence, to some of this malignment, because most girls do not know their rights. So educating, I think the first step is granting some of these girls an access to a formal education, because there's still areas in Uganda where girls do not go to school. And during the lockdown, it was worsened, whereby some girls are getting married off at 14, girls getting married off at 15, because it has been a lockdown, and the parents are excusing this as, oh, there's nothing for us to do since there's a lockdown, we're now home, and this is our only source of income, marrying their daughters off to get bride price. And these children, these girls are pretty okay with this because this is what has been happening. So I think one of the ways to combat this is to educate these girls, actually making sure that they get an access to formal education. Uganda has a serious problem where they think some of these problems are family problems, like, oh, she's not going to school. It's not where people act like it's not my problem, it's not the country's problem, it's this family's problem, since, oh, my daughter is going to school. And in the end, this is what's happening, where girls are getting married off because they do not know their rights. And well, it's depressing because even our lawmakers do not, when you hear the arguments in the parliament, you properly see that most of them do not care for women. And I think, first of all, to even get this out there, we need to see more girls learning their rights. Most of all, whether they get a formal education or not, most of them need to know their rights. And I think culture worsens this also, against feminism, because we live in a patriarchal society where men usually control everything. So right from childhood, girls are told that they're inferior. So I think in case we broke some aspects of this and told girls that they're equal, like straight from their homes, straight from school, so we don't get lawmakers who still see girls as being inferior and make arguments and pass bills depending on such a mentality, I think this would go a very long way into promoting equality. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think, you know, it's interesting that for many of us, and I think for you as well, education is a privilege, because there's so many in your country that are not privileged to get that education. So with that in mind, knowing that your education is a privilege, I'm going to put you on the spot, but where do you see yourself in 10 years' time in your climate? Do you see yourself trying to make changes in those kind of spaces, and with regards to what we're speaking about?
Please, could you please repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, I think you got a bit stuck, but I was saying to you, Sheila, that, you know, just to put you on the spot, in 10 years' time, do you see yourself, you know, with your incredible career that you've got planned, do you see yourself being active within the system of trying to get girls to be educated? What do you see? How do you see yourself contributing to the plight of your country?
I currently volunteer with an organization called 40 Days Over 40 Smiles, which targets promoting child literacy. We are currently working with children in Kampala, but to be very honest, in 10 years' time, from our current political climate, there's a running joke that, oh my God, in case you can get out of Uganda, get out, like run out of this country because of our current political climate and from the current elections we had, which are violent, but still disappearing. So we're still doing our best, but at the back of my mind, there's that plan B of run out of this country. But I still work with these children, and 10 years down the road, I still would like to keep on promoting child literacy. Currently, our reach is only in Kampala, but we still go around. And then also with Girl Up Uganda, we travel to schools for mainly disadvantaged girls, and we teach them their rights. We do the best we can for these people, like to know their rights, because I believe the first step is awareness. So I think in 10 years' time, I'll still be doing this. And I hope that each girl whose life I've touched in any small way could also keep on touching another girl's life and creating a chain reaction.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And to bring the topic closer to home, Nasirah, you're a 17-year-old, and as a young person experiencing the dark cloud of gender-based violence within South Africa, what does this mean to you as a spoken word poet and author? Is the reality of gender-based violence prevalent in your work?
I think maybe when I was younger, I never really used to address topics like that, but now I do write about things like that. I write about gender-based violence and the femicide in South Africa, which is incredibly worrying. I feel that not only do we need to educate like the women and the young girls of South Africa, but more importantly, we need to educate the men and the young boys of South Africa so that they basically don't grow up to do the things that men in South Africa are currently doing.
Yes, definitely. I agree, Nasirah. And with you and your friends as young people, because as I was saying earlier on to Sinalo, that I'm so interested in what's going on in the minds of you young people. You're 17, Sinalo is 19, Jana is 15. But as young girls, I know as a woman, shan't expose the age of my womanhood. But as a woman, I know that when I talk to my lady friends, I know what we talk about. But what are some of the conversations that you and your friends are having around this gender-based violence? Because it really is something that we are heavily confronted with.
I think a lot of my friends, the conversations we have about things like this usually tend to go, they're usually about things like how we don't want to go to certain places alone as a group of girls, especially in South Africa, because it's not safe at all. And a lot of our conversations include things such as like rape culture and conversations that we overhear from like boys our age that just are incredibly misogynistic. And I think we tend to talk about topics like that quite often.
Yeah, and I think it is important to talk about those things, which is why I wanted to know if you and your friends are talking about it, because I think a part of the problem, and I think it's really up to you guys, you Nasirah, you Sinalo. Part of the problem is that historically, these are the kind of topics that are not allowed to be spoken about. They are hush-hush topics, hide them away, don't talk about it. So I'm glad to know that you guys are talking about it, and I want to encourage you to continue speaking about it, and not just speak about it in closed doors with just your girlfriends. Speak about it with your male friends, speak about it with your male classmates, challenge them, challenge the status quo, challenge their mentality, challenge them when they say misogynistic things to you, ask them, why do you feel that it's important? So good job on that one, Nasirah. Amanda, in 2009, I was privileged enough to visit Beirut, Lebanon, and I will never forget that trip. I performed with a musical called African Footprint. It was one of the best 2 years of my life. I had such a great time. I even remember dancing on a club table in Beirut somewhere. It was really, really awesome. But coupled with the awesomeness of that, I really do remember the complexities of the social and political climate in Lebanon.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So with you, you are an advocate for peace. You host a podcast around peace, you know, so I want you to just tell us a little bit about the book that you are working on, the book about the Lebanese history, and working from a peace-based approach.
Absolutely. So to set things in context, I'll just tell you guys a little bit about my educational background. So I have a background in psychology and political science, and I did a master's in something called international peace studies. So basically what that is conflict resolution. So it really kind of focused my vision on the topic of peace and conflict. I started the Let's Talk Peace podcast during lockdown, actually, during COVID. I didn't have much to do and I wanted to challenge myself and to meet new people, and it was a great way for doing that. But I started the podcast and I started to meet different people, like everybody in this panel from different parts of the world, who kind of had the same values and that same interest in, you know, challenging the violent structures that are inherent in our societies and, you know, putting better energy out there. And through that, I became more involved in activism in the country. I became involved in many different organizations. And one of the organizations that I actually got a job in later is called Bet El Barake. And Bet El Barake is an organization based here in Beirut. And they do various things. Amongst the things that they do are educational programs. So my job, I'm working on creating a Lebanese history book. And it's a new up-to-date version, and I'm not a historian myself. So I have a background in many other things, but I'm not a historian. So I'm working closely with a historian, a very well-known historian here in Lebanon, to write this history book. And what I'm bringing to the table, besides writing the actual book, is I'm adding the peace-building lens to things, because history as a subject, it's never neutral. I'm sure we've all experienced this. History, as they say, is written by the victor, the victorious parties in whatever conflict or situation it may be. And the case of Lebanon is no different. For example, we had a 15-year civil war, and this civil war is not even mentioned in the history books in schools. You have to talk about these things, you really do. And the thing with Lebanon is we've had all of these conflicts and no efforts towards conflict resolution have taken place. And this is where change needs to happen. And, you know, starting with this history book, it's a good first step, because education is so powerful, as we all know.
Yeah, absolutely, Amanda. And I don't mean to speak out of turn, but what I also meant to say when I was telling you about my experiences, my experience in Beirut, is that I cannot forget the feeling of driving around and having a backdrop of buildings that are bombed, freshly bombed, you know, driving around on a highway and you just randomly get stopped by soldiers in an army van that just want to just check your car. And what I realized about the friends that I had then made in Beirut who were showing us around, they seemed very comfortable in the chaos. They seemed very okay in the unrest and okay with a man with the big AK-47 checking his car and the backdrop of a bombed background. So it is what you're saying, to say that nobody seems to be wanting to take up the fight for peace. And I experienced that because I experienced the comfortability of existing in this unrest.
You know, that's what happens when we are exposed to violence for so long. You become numb, you get used to it. And, you know, there's a good side to this. Lebanese people, they love life, they love to party, as I'm sure you experienced in Beirut. But then there's also the side where you start to view these horrible things as normal, and then you forget that you deserve better and that there can be something better if you just put that work in. But things actually in Lebanon have changed recently. On August 4th of last year, we had this massive explosion at the Beirut port that wiped out half of the capital. And I think that was the final straw. Like, change is coming. The government has collapsed yet again, no big surprise. But before this explosion, we actually had what was a revolution starting in 2019, where people started really to wake up to the reality of the corruption and the despair. And I'd say that that's changing a little bit.
Very, very glad to hear that. And sometimes you need momentous things like such a huge bombing and explosion to happen before we really, the penny needs to drop. So I'm going to move on to Somto. You know, Somto, you are also a creative writer. And very simply, I want to know, can you tell us a little bit about the subject that is most pressing to you at the moment that affects human rights?
Okay. I'd like to speak on the topic concerning the youth in Nigeria. Recently, we had a protest where we went out to protest against the violence of the police force in our country, and a lot of young people died in the process of that of the protest. And at the end of the day, everything felt like it wasn't worth it, because most of it got swept under, most of the killings went unaccounted for, and it just lives in our minds. It just lives constantly, because we all, okay, what brought the camels back was the killings that happened at the Lekki toll gate, where young people gathered and blockaded the toll gate, and the Nigerian army, who are meant to protect us, came and fired upon us. And you could, from where I was living, I could hear the bullets, I could just hear everything, and it's not something you get to forget. Yeah, and it just happened all over the country. Young people were just dying all over the country, but at Lekki toll gate, that was where I think it got more publicity. The international community spoke about it, and our government, yeah, they came up with an entire panel to talk about it, and at the end of the day, it just got swept under as well. So yeah, the lives of young people in Nigeria, it's a very it's not an entirely pleasant one, because the system, the government, and everything, it's really poor, and we've inherited this culture, this community, or whatever. We've inherited it from our predecessors, and what they've handed down to us it's not something to write home about. And talk about that, and then when you go talk about the youth in general, yeah, they get affected by those things. But when you talk about marginalized youth, you talk about queer people, you talk about women, and you see that it gets even worse for them. Because I clearly remember during the protest, some queer people came out to talk about how they are affected personally by the police force, how they're being harassed, how they're being killed and murdered, and their corpses are being dumped in bushes and never heard about anymore. And then they are being silenced by other protesters. We are all fighting for the same thing. Like, so why exactly are you hushing them? Why are you saying they cannot speak? They are talking about their own experiences, and you're coming out to say, no, you cannot speak about your own experiences. Talk about it some other time. But they are part of the people who are being affected by this brutality, by this the harshness of the government against the youth. They are also being affected. And you say, no, you cannot speak about it. Women come up and they say, this is how we are being affected by this thing. This is how this is kind of culture we live in. If it's so terrible for men, imagine what it is for women. And then men are coming around saying it affects us all. It's a general thing. But women are talking about how it affects them personally. They are allowed to speak about that as well, to talk about their own experiences as well. So yeah, and sometimes it can be very disheartening, even when we gather to talk about issues. Some people feel their oppression. Some people feel some of those talk about their own oppression. They feel like maybe it's not as consequential as others, and they say we can talk about it later, some other time. But no, we are going to have that discussion here. We're going to have a discussion now. So yeah, I guess in terms of writing, yeah, I guess lots of writers are standing up and they're speaking about these things. Lots of African writers, Mona Eldewe, Chimamanda Adichie, Elnathan John, they're all coming up and they're talking about these issues that are affecting us as young people, affecting women, that are affecting queer people. And yeah, and growing up, I didn't get to hear about these things, but getting through those works, through books, through movies, I got to see that people are actually living these lives. These are people's realities, and that things are happening. And I believe that those conversations need to be had more frequently. They need to be had because young people who are growing up are being fed with a lot of negative, with a lot of discriminating, hateful rhetorics, and I think it needs to be combated, because if the young people of today are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, it would be of a benefit if they are progressive, if they are forward-thinking, and if they are void of hate and discrimination in all its forms. I think it will be better off if we get to have young people who are kinder, young people who are tolerant, and young people who are positive thinking. So I believe that through works, through writing, through films, through music, I believe that those conversations need to be had more frequently, needs to be heard, it needs to be discussed more and more. So yeah, I think that's it, yes.
Thank you so much, Somto. And I think you're so right. If you could just mute that for me, but I think you are so right, Somto, in that we have to continue to have these conversations. And that's why I was encouraging the young lady to continue having the conversations with her friends, because, you know, we don't realize the impact that has had just from communicating, even if it's just between one or two of you. And you mentioned something about how the killings and everything, the bombings and the shootings that happened in Nigeria, how they were just shoved under the rug like it never happened. You know, when something like that happens, it is very clear that a nation is a nation is being suppressed and silenced. And that is where artists come in. That is where art activism comes in. That is how Negro spirituals came about. You know, even us as South African Black people during apartheid times, we used music to communicate messages, and the person who did not understand what we were saying just thought we were having a good time singing, yet we were communicating. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Somto. I'm going to move on to Joyia, who is age 17 from the USA. You are still a high school student, Joyia, and you're an advocate for education. In the context of where you are at the moment, the United States of America, why do you choose to be an advocate and an ambassador for education?
Having education is like the most important thing we have. It's where we start and it's where we end, because learning it's all about what you want to. Like, you have to take what you learn and add it to your experience in life. Because technically it's just when you learn something and then you see it for yourself of how it is and how it works, then you get a better understanding of what you get out of it. So it's like you need to hear it and then experience it. So yeah.
You know, Somto mentioned something, Joyia. He mentioned that it's tough to be who he is, a Black man on the African continent and everything that's happening in Nigeria. And then he said, but now imagine what it's like for a woman. You know, so he highlighted something to say that we're all human beings, but we're not equal, and we all know this. But I think when he said it, it just hit me again. You know, you're a woman in the United States and you have an education, and we have, I think it was Sheila maybe, who told us about the plight in Uganda, about young women who are still just trying to fight to learn the ABC. So when all of that comes, you know, when you look at that, what does it mean for you? Does that trigger any part of you? Does that push any buttons to know that, you know, you're in a position to receive education, you're an ambassador for education. And then you have young women who are just like you. They're only separated by geography, but they're just like you who can't even learn the ABC. Does that mean anything for you?
Yeah, it does. It's like, to me, that is it's unfair, knowing that I get to have an education and I get to learn, but there's other people who want to learn that aren't able to. I think the men and women all together, they need the education to be able to accomplish bigger things. And it don't make sense for people to not have an education just because somebody said they couldn't. It's weird, honestly. You know, I've always thought that just from where I'm at, the education system it is bad. And I believe that in some form or way that we can change it if we continue to learn more about it and add our own opinion to it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joyia. And I'm going to save, not the least for last, Raeesah. You know, the biography that I received of you, you described yourself as a revolutionary. I love that because you're only 17, and the confidence to call yourself a revolutionary means that there must be something that you understand about yourself and the climate that you exist in. So why do you call yourself a revolutionary?
Hello. So I call myself a revolutionary because what is a revolution? A revolution is change, a complete change, and that's what we need. The system of the world we live in it was never meant for us. It was never meant to work for us. It's a colonial imperialist system, and the system needs to be completely changed. We need a revolution, and I call myself a revolutionary because I believe in the revolution and I will fight for that revolution.
Tell me a little bit more. What kind of revolution do you want to see? Give me a visual, a 1-minute visual when you close your eyes and you're like, this is my revolution. What do you see?
So just in 1 minute. So there's so many things that need to be, there's so many changes that need to be made because the world we live in is so rooted in colonialism. It's so rooted in imperialism. And even that, we need to, in everything, because I do a lot of climate activism and I do a lot of different kinds of activism, and within these spaces and within the solutions that are made, there's still, there's not enough focus on people, and there's not enough focus on not leaving people behind. And for me, it's so important to not just change things within the system, but to change the system completely, because there's always going to be people left out. With colonialism, with imperialism, the foundation is exploitation, and it is leaving people out and oppressing people. And for me, what I am fighting for is, I believe that every single human being should have their rights met, no matter what, just because they're human. No one should have to work to survive. Everyone should have good healthcare. Everyone should have education. Everyone should have housing and food just because they're human, you know? So for me, that is what I am striving for. And to do that, to get there, there's so many things that need to be addressed, the legacy of colonization, the effects of apartheid, the effects, all these effects of the racism and imperialism that's still so prevalent today. And yeah.
Do you think part of the problem, Raeesah, is that we've kind of put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound?
Honestly, wait, what do you mean by that?
I mean, you talk about issues like apartheid issues, and you talk about just simple human rights issues. We are all human beings. For instance, as people of color, do you think to a large extent, we've had to, not just people of color, any kind of people, any kind of injustice, I'm just making an example, but do you think that things are not tackled as deeply as they should be? It's almost like, you've got this bullet wound and someone just puts a band-aid and just says, oh, you'll be fine, go along, you're not dead, you're fine. Do you think we're treating heavy situations a bit too lightly? Because it sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Things are so heavy, and things, like, everything is so heavy, and when tackling everything, all the solutions that are currently in place, like we have to look at who did it and why, and who it still benefits and who's still being left out, and things like even apartheid ending. There's still so much within that, still so much like, who was it, who was left out, who was part of the negotiation process, who was killed, Steve Biko, like who was killed for that, and why, and like all those types of things. And I think it's difficult. It takes a long time to look at the roots of things, because things are so easy to see, like, at surface level. Like, if you look at climate change, you can see it at, like, on surface level. Okay, the climate is changing. Why? Because of fossil fuels. And it takes a bit more to get to why are there fossil fuel emissions? Because of, like, things like capitalism. Why is that a thing? And then you link it to other social justice issues. And that requires a lot. It's a long process, it's a long process to be able to connect all these issues, because, like, I call myself an intersectional activist, because I believe that you cannot separate anything, because in order to deal with one, like, you cannot solve one problem without addressing, how it affects everything else. And for me, there's just, it's a long process to get to that point where you can see how everything connects, and people won't do that in terms of people in power. And because generally, like, corporations and companies, everything that they do is largely performative, and they don't actually, why would they want things to change? Because that would mean that we take, they aren't here anymore and everyone is here. And why would they want that? And so currently in media and all of that, we need to look at just who has the narrative, and how, like, how tiny the little bubble that they're addressing is. Because I think it's so much easier to say, don't use plastic straws, use metal straws, than it is to address that, like, the actual root cause of things, and to talk about how people are being oppressed and underpaid, and how resources are being stolen, and just capitalism.
Yeah, I hear you. And you actually touched on something that I'm really passionate about. I feel like my hands are chopped at the wrist about it, but I'm very, very passionate about it. You touched on colonialism, and what are we learning? So it reminds me of the conversation we had with Sheila earlier on around girls that are not getting educated. But then my question will be, when girls are getting educated, what are we educating them on? Are we giving them colonial education? So do we then fight for them to get the colonial education, or do we, where do we pick up the fight? And you guys can use your the formal part of this has stopped. I'm going to give us another 15 minutes maybe to just open the platform and continue. You can raise your hand if you want to answer, but where do we even pick this up? I would love for the girls to get educated, but what are we giving them? Are we teaching them about being women, of African women? Are we teaching them about being African women fitting in a colonial system? And maybe Sheila could be somebody that answers, even Joyia as a young woman who is an advocate for education. You could maybe even enlighten us on the subject. Sheila? Okay, Sheila seems to not be here for now, but I'm going to read one of the comments on the side. Afzal says, colonialism and imperialism is the root cause of much of the wrongs, ills, social injustices, exploitation, and corruption on earth. We must believe that we can effect change so that all people on earth can experience social justice and live in comfort and peace and harmony. So Sheila, do you think, what is better, to give them, to get them into a colonial educational system, or to try and figure out a better system?
Uganda is still using a colonial system, with education just getting switched up last year because we're still learning about Canada instead of places in Uganda till last year. So I think we need to also change the education system and like feed these girls with things. I think we need to move with the times, learn more things about technology, learn more about innovation than learning about, also other than learning about our cultures. Or I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm saying part of our things in our cultures also need to evolve. And we need to accept that we live in a dynamic world and leave some of the things behind because they're not relevant. We need to change our education, keep more centered to the current times, make it more centered to female rights and not what the colonialists taught us. Yes.
Completely. And, for all of us who are watching, if you haven't seen, I might mess up the title of this particular panel, but it was yesterday, and it was with poets, and they spoke around, poetry and human rights and all of that. But there was a gentleman from Ghana, I think, and his name is Nati, and he recited a poem of his about African identity, and his poem was written, Nati Ogli, thank you so much, and his poem was about really African identity. And listening to him, I realized just how much of myself I did not know, because nobody told me who I was. Nobody told me who Nefertiti was. Nobody told me what Kemet was. Nobody told me all those things. Instead, I was taught where I fit in a colonial system. So hence my question to say that, are we fighting for education, and what kind of education are we then fighting for? Because I think it's important. We've got a very sweet message here from Emmanuel SK, who says, this is really informative. I would be more than pleased to take part one day. Thank you so much. Janelle says, oppressed people around the world are not seeing revenge from its oppressors, only justice and equality. And Jana, also even for us Palestinians, education is a huge part of our struggle, both being able to get educated and continuing and also changing the education system-wise. So I'm going to ask one more question. It is a South African driven question, but if you can translate it to your own location, please do. Give me a raised hand if you think you want to go for this one. This is from Dudu Faleni. He says, the recent reported challenges towards the step aside position in the ANC seems to manifest a soul society that has lost its moral compass. Who will become the moral torchbearers if such a bold initiative aimed at reclaim the morality collapses? So I think what Dudu is saying is that those that were put in position to fight for morality, to fight our justice, they are going against the grain. So if they are doing that, then who was supposed to do that? And I think really this is not a South African question. I think it goes to anybody. Many of us have been disappointed by the leaders that are placed in position. So when your leaders are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, what do we do? Anybody? Sinalo.
Basically for me, I think our leaders are not doing what they are supposed to be doing, because I believe we should also consider the youth in your parliaments, also in a lot of things, because our leaders are taking like everything, like they're taking how should I put this? They're not considering us as the youth. They don't involve us when they are taking decisions. So I believe with our leaders are not doing what they are supposed to do. Sometimes they just use their power to do things that they aren't supposed to do. So I believe with our leaders are not doing what they should be doing.
Go for it, Jana.
Yes, totally. For us as Palestinians here, because us as a country technically living under occupation, even our leaders are under occupation and have to take orders from the occupation authority. Like they literally cannot do anything unless it's approved by the Israeli authorities. So that is a very huge problem for us Palestinians, and that's why I believe here comes the role of the people themselves, because we cannot change things unless the people, the poor people, the affected people who are actually suffering and who are actually getting arrested, the children, are the ones who are supposed to do something about it. And that's what we're actually advocating for. That's why people should actually try to get more educated about what's going on, because the youth of the whole entire world are the ones who I personally believe should unite to make this world a world of peace, a world of love, a world of equality, because we're living in a very colonialist, capitalist system that is ruining our lives as youth and taking away our childhood. So yeah, I think it's very important for us to stand up for all these things.
Absolutely. And I think that it really begs the question, and maybe Jana, you would be the one to answer this question, but it really begs the question, when you're in a system that is not working for you, that is potentially dangerous, that hushes the cries of those who have been bombed and bulldozed by guns, when they hush you, where do you then find the courage, the hope, the resilience to fight? Where do you find that when it really seems like your back is against the wall? So Jana, I'm actually gonna maybe move this answer to Raeesah, because she seems to have a hand up, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
I think that would have been a really good question for Jana, just because she's from Palestine. But for me, it's heavy, and engaging with other youth activists. Like we do that a lot. It's really heavy because we're trying, but the system, it's so massive. And a massive thing that we need to do is just hold them accountable. And accountability is something that it's just like in South Africa, it's not happening. Because it's a constant thing of, we know, like everyone knows about corruption and everyone knows that the government sucks, and we don't know what to do. Even when it comes to elections, like we don't know who to vote for, because everyone is bad. There's like ANC who's just, and then there's DA who is white supremacist, and we need to get to the point where we have, like, people know about alternatives, and people at the point where they want to fight. And at the same time, being able to be an activist and being able to take part in these things is such a privilege, being like looking at other places in Africa, and looking at like Nigeria last year, was this year, I can't remember, but the election, when it came to the elections, in Uganda, the violence towards protesters in India, the violence towards protesters in Palestine, the violence towards protesters. Like, I take for granted a lot how able I am to go out and protest, and have nothing happen to me, because that's a big thing. Like, being able to do that is a big thing. And I know for people of color as well, we can't do things that white activists can do, because it's dangerous. it's genuinely dangerous. But also there's that thing where if people don't know where their next meal is coming from, if people are struggling with housing, if people like are struggling to survive, it's how do you expect them to prioritize these things? So these are big discussions, and it's so important to be having these big discussions, you know. And what we can do is this, you know, what we can do is this.
Absolutely, Raeesah. And you mentioned some important things. I'm gonna brush us through this because it looks like our conversation is getting interesting. But you mentioned something about accountability. I think we've, you know, the previous message that I read from Tutu, I think he mentioned something important about being demoralized as people. It's actually a systemic thing where they take you through the wrong kind of education for you and all kinds of other systems that they use to demoralize you. So what happens when you're demoralized? When you see, you know, for instance, we are demoralized and desensitized around gender-based violence. You know, you read about another woman who's been stabbed and killed and you're like, huh, another one bites the dust. And you read about 100 million that's been shoved in the pockets of politicians and you go, ah, another one bites the dust, because you've been demoralized as a people. But what is great and where the hope has been reinstilled in us is what we've seen from abahlali base NAC, who went for it. They took accountability. They said, we want to know what has happened. And I think that is something that we haven't seen in a really long time in our country. I just want to go through a few things that I've seen on Facebook from Gregory Makoma, who says history as a subject is never neutral, which somebody mentioned on the panel. They said history is on the side of the victor. Irfan says, we are the ones we've been waiting for. You're right, Irfan. We need to build collective power and strengthen solidarity between all our struggles. This must be built upon a value system that always puts people and the environment before profit and greed. And I'll read one more. To the two, somebody on Facebook says, to the two Palestine activists, do you think BDS is working or has impacted change in a capitalist racist system world? So for that one, I think that is for you, Jana, and I'm going to ask you maybe if you can go personally onto the Facebook page and see if you can't answer that directly on the Facebook page. But I do need to bring our discussion to an end. I've got about 2 minutes left, and I had asked Jacques if he could give us a small snippet, a little verse to play us out to end this panel and, more importantly, to end the festival. Jacques, do you have anything for us? A beautiful protest art piece that you can share with us?
Yes. I kind of have like something in mind. I don't mind saying it for that 2 minutes. And it goes like this. I don't believe in xenophobia, but I know that people change. My life is a movie. It are not different from you. I speak for the youth. Here's my view. I'm from Burundi. I speak Zulu, Swahili, and Kirundi. I'm not racist. Let's take to the basics. I was on an island like Ahmed Kathrada, also the value they fought for. Palestine, together we stand gender-based. We can speak without being violence. I thank you.
Short and sweet. You are a man of your word, Jacques. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you playing us out. I just want to say to all of you guys that are on this platform, I'm getting goosebumps. I am incredibly inspired by all of you. I want to encourage you all to continue working and striving for the betterment of the human race. I want to encourage you guys to fly the flag high for whatever it is that you are fighting for. Change will come, but it does obviously take all of us. And to everybody who has tuned in today, there are so many messages. I think so many people have been inspired by the conversation that you guys are having here tonight. So we just want to thank everybody that is tuning in from home, and to the Artfluence Festival, University of KZN, and all the sponsors and all the partners. We just want to say thank you so much for creating such an incredible platform. So many people on the chat are just mentioning what a great platform this is. And I think we should all continue to create these kind of platforms that allow people to talk and exchange and connect and really just express what it is that we need to express as the human race. But for me, Lesego Ramatlare, and all of my peers and colleagues on this platform, I'd like to say thank you so much.